Without a doubt, the 2024 British Columbia provincial election has been the dirtiest and nastiest Canadian election that at least I know about. This has been truly a wild ride to be on, and hopefully the BC Conservatives will be able to win today as people are currently going out and voting. And before I move on to the topics I want to talk about, that being how just insane the BC NDP has been in this race, make sure that you, every single member of your family, all of your friends, go out and vote in BC for the BC Conservatives. If you do not live in British Columbia, go through your Facebook timeline, go through your X timeline, Instagram, all those things, see who lives in BC and harass them a little bit so that they can go out and vote, because this is not an election where, it's rainy outside and I want to sit on my couch and watch Matlock or whatever. Vote in the election first, do that afterwards. Pause this video and go do that. Anyways, now I want to just talk about just how out of the ordinary nasty this election has been. And I think it's a trick that you can only pull once. The BC NDP have gone all out on the BC Conservatives to smear them, slander them, basically just make up lies about their platform. And that's not a generic thing I'm saying. In every election, you will have parties lying about each other a little bit, exaggerating their stance on this policy, saying that based on their record of 50 years ago, they might do this, trying to cast onto their opponent the worst possible version of what their agenda could be. I find conservatives don't usually have to do that because the BC NDP's agenda is pretty bad, or I mean, all NDP and liberal agendas tend to be pretty bad these days. But that's typical. In British Columbia, though, it's been like an American presidential election, a modern American presidential election, in the type of hits that the NDP have been taking out on the BC Conservatives. Like just digging up comments someone made in a Facebook group 10 years ago in the reply section, and then using that as the main thing that they're running on. And the reason that Premier David Eby and the BC NDP have been doing this, it's because they suck at governing. They are terrible on policy. And way more people need to ask themselves, as the mainstream media, the legacy media, CTV News, Global, CDTV, and CBC keep wanting to go along with the BC NDP and make this election all about, well, this guy made this joke 3 years ago on an X account that he doesn't use anymore. Why aren't we talking about policy? What aren't they telling you about the current government's performance on policy and what people feel about them? Because this entire election, both the BC NDP and the media have been trying to make you feel weird if you think that we need a conservative government to clean things up. Why would you want them? Oh, they have a candidate that's racist or something. And it's like not even racist. They'll just pull up something and then they'll misinterpret it into like the stars and then tell you that this person's a horrible bigot, even though they obviously are not. That has been the entire campaign, even though the BC NDP have been governing when the BC is now half of all the opioid deaths in the country. Housing is not affordable. Crime is through the roof. Job losses. We just had 18,000 job losses in BC alone in September. That's insane. And the legacy media, according to people who have been watching it and telling me what's happening, the news will start off and say, oh, well, the BC Conservatives are stumbling and it looks like the NDP are catching some momentum. And they're doing this really generic horse race between the two parties without saying, oh, yeah, by the way, you know how there's a bunch of effectively zombies on East Hastings because of their massive opioid addiction? Yeah, the NDP are giving them those drugs so that they can either take them, the hydromorphone, or they can sell it for harder stuff like fentanyl and heroin. There are so many voters who just are disconnected from the real issues of the race that they're voting in. I'm not talking about BC in general. I'm talking about every race. Even when I was running in the federal conservative nomination in Calgary Signal Hill, it's startling how many people just watch legacy media and they don't know about half the issues that are going on. And they're not like you have to do a lot of research to know that this is an issue. It's like the economy's not good. You'll have people telling you, well, the GDP rose by 2% last year, or like whatever amount. And it's like, well, what's the GDP per capita number? That kind of matters. I don't care if the GDP goes up by 50% in a year. Did the population increase 10 times? Because then it does not matter. India has a bigger GDP than Canada. China has a bigger GDP than Canada. people who live in those countries are also not even a fourth of the wealth of an average Canadian. It's crazy. Anyways, so that's my little rant on that. But the BC NDP campaign has basically not wanted to talk about a single policy issue the entire time. And I now just want to bring up their social media because it's wild how they'll just say something that I feel like if we had any educated voter would look at it. And to be fair, a lot of people do see this because they get ratioed hard on a lot of their posts. They'll just say, we're gonna help the healthcare system. Oh, you have to vote for us if you want more nurses and doctors. It's like, who actually buys any of this crap? Who actually thinks that these people are going to like help healthcare or whatever when they've been firing nurses and doctors? Sorry, they've been posting a lot on election day, so I'm trying to get to all those things they posted yesterday. But I remember I replied to them, and like within 30 minutes, I'd ratioed them. I think it's turned around because they artificially all share their same posts. Yes, it's this one right here. This one was wild to me. If I was the BC comms director, the BC NDP comms director, I'd just tell them, don't post this. You're going to tee up so many conservative people to dunk on you. But this is an actual pitch they make from the BC NDP's official account on X. If you want to hire more doctors and nurses, vote BC NDP. If you want to build more homes, vote BC NDP. If you want to grow a strong, clean economy, vote BC NDP. What? You guys, and what I even had, I had an interaction with a BC NDP cheerleader in the comments of that after I had basically said, what's better in 7 years? And they said, well, the BC NDP hired 800 more nurses and doctors. You fired 3,000 of them. On top of that, there was actually a lot of nurses and doctors who quit before they were fired because they could already see the vaccine mandates coming. And most of those people have not been rehired because after the COVID vaccine mandate was removed on nurses and doctors in British Columbia, years after every other province had already removed them, that's when the BC NDP then implemented even more hoops that you have to jump through in order to be reapproved to start working in the medical system. Just yesterday, I talked to a woman from Poland who was working as a doctor in British Columbia. And even though the mandates are gone, she says, I don't trust them, so I'm not coming back. And the thing is that, and this is actually a very interesting thing that was noted, because they were from a former Soviet bloc country, they said, I have deep distrust whenever something is mandated when it's not obviously necessary for you to do. Like, obviously, it's mandatory to wear a uniform when you're at work at a hospital. But when you start mandating a COVID vaccine, who a nurse is smart enough to know is not really going to stop transmissions, it's not really going to prevent that many more deaths, especially for younger people who typically are nurses. Like the people who are nurses are going to skew a little bit more on the younger side of the population. That she very much kicks back against stuff like that because when you're from a Soviet bloc country, you know all of these stupid loyalty tests that authoritarian governments put down on you to try and make you conform, and they don't want to have anything to do with nonsense like that anymore. So they basically just said, nope, I'm out. Anyways, but to keep going, but like that, and then we want to build more homes. Housing starts over the past 2 years are down in British Columbia. Over the past 2 years, both years that Premier David Eby has been in charge, in 2023, in fact, they were down by 8%. That's significant because they'd been down for a while and they keep going down. Whenever housing prices increase, in theory, that means there's way more incentive to build a house. But it sucks so much to build a house in British Columbia, just like San Francisco or Los Angeles or New York City, that nobody does it because it's not worth it. The amount of regulations you have to follow, building codes, environmental inspections, different things that you have to outfit homes with. I think these days you're probably mandated to put solar panels on the things. You can't even let your workers use porta potties on the property while you're putting up the house. You have to bring in flow toilets. And when I was saying how this is obviously going to increase costs for construction sites, which means that you're going to have more developers who can't afford to build as many homes as they currently are, and we're going to have CE shortages, then you get some just absolute mouth-breathing BC NDP staffer come to me, and this actually happened. They're like, oh, so you don't think construction employees deserve flow toilets? Who's saying anything like that? I'm talking about economics. I didn't realize that we deserve everything. I deserve a free house. I deserve better editing software. Why should I have to pay for it? Well, I deserve to have 3-ply toilet paper. Like, yeah, everyone thinks they deserve more. And in fact, everyone deserves less. And the only way that everyone gets more is everyone works a little bit harder. But this is the NDP sort of frame of mind. That why doesn't the government just say that we all get better? Oh, we all should get free pharmacare on the federal level. We should all get free dental care. Oh, free child care. It's not happening because someone has to provide it. And if someone's not incentivized to provide it, why the heck are they going to do it? And that's what's going to happen with all these government programs. Every single stupid government program eventually just collapses in on itself. And basically, we have to start giving out rationing care, rationing supply, because the government just took it for granted that that thing is available all the time, when it takes hard work and people need to be able to profit at the end of the day to have incentive to provide it. That's the thing I never got on public health care. You will still get people in Canada a little bit brainwashed into the idea that they're like, oh, but the BC Conservatives are going to bring in a two-tier system. What do we have now? Oh my goodness, what do we have now? We have no system. We have basically a system where some people might get healthcare sometimes if they wait a long time. Two-tier doesn't even mean that we're now going to say that we have the same amount of healthcare, but you can pay to get to the front of the line. That's the socialist way of thinking about it, because they see everything as a pie that cannot expand, and that we're just going to try and cut it up more equitably. A two-tier system, or basically a system where you can pay money to go to a private clinic that's outside of the normal public system, that creates more supply, that creates more doctors, that opens up more clinics and hospitals. But you'll get people saying like, ooh, but that's American style. Oh my goodness. What? No, let's have more. Even the American system. The American system is expensive because it's a private system with a massive public system off of its side. No, people who have Medicare and Medicaid coverage don't pay basically anything. And that cost gets passed on to people who have private insurance. And even their private insurance system, frankly, works better than Canada's public insurance system, because at least you can actually get care in the US. And if you have insurance, everything's pretty much paid for. And most people have insurance in the US. In Canada, everyone has the public insurance, but nobody has a guarantee to get healthcare, and you're often waiting more than a year to get something that's going to get worse in just a few months. And by the time they want to operate on whatever you were originally scheduled to have operated on, it's gotten worse and the issue's expanded and they can't actually deal with the problem. It's insane what we have in Canada here. But the entire campaign, like, I don't know who watches the NDP campaign and thinks this is good. Like, and again, it really demonstrates how delusional the media is. Again, I heard, my mom was actually watching CTV News for a bit and just told me what they were saying. And she was blown away. They were saying that, oh, the Conservatives started collapsing in their support after the debate. No, they didn't. They actually started doing better in many polls after the debate. Some polls showed them go down, but they're pollsters who barely do any polling, and they had really bad regionals. Like, if you have the NDP and the Conservatives tight in the north and interior, it's a bad poll. That's just not true. It's like in Alberta during the 2023 election. A lot of these same pollsters who are polling in British Columbia and showing us with only a slight lead, or the NDP with a slight lead, they ended up missing that election by like 10% for the UCP. What those pollsters in Alberta would say, oh yeah, like a lot of these rural ridings are tight. You know what I mean? Oh, the NDP might be close in like east or like western Lethbridge. It's like they're not. They're just not close. There's like the interior, the farming regions are not close. Even in BC, I actually think that there's going to be a big polling miss, because people who live in rural areas do not take polls. And in many of the ridings that I've been door knocking in, the cities, the suburbs are really tight. I think we have an edge in many of them, but even if it's 50-50, we win, because the rural ridings, if they show up, they're going to give us another 3,000, 4,000 votes in some of these ridings, and be able to offset the cities where we're probably going to be tied with the NDP, 15,000, 50,000, something like that. Or usually people don't vote that much in BC elections, although you never know, because this is going to be a high turnout race. A million people voted in advance when only 671,000 voted last time, and the population didn't increase that much over the past 4 years, especially the voting population. I'm trying to find some other stuff here with the BC NDP, but like even the healthcare, here's another lie that they had. I don't even exactly need to show things on screen, just breaking down how obvious these are. The Conservatives are going to cut $4.3 billion from healthcare. What parties ever run on cutting healthcare? That's just not a thing in Canadian politics. Have you ever had a party who's run on cutting healthcare? They never have. Some parties have cut healthcare, most of those being liberals in the 90s and early 2000s because of the debt crisis, but no party has ever cut healthcare. The lie that they've been pushing that the Conservatives want to cut healthcare is based on a policy report that the Conservatives just cited, showing that in the long run, if spending is done more efficiently and more money is moved away from administration below, HR positions that nobody needs and all this stuff, and you move it to the front lines, that in time maybe per capita spending might be able to go down. So in the long run, the increases in money that you give to the healthcare system are not going to keep up with the population because the dollars being spent more efficiently and you don't need extra dollars. That's what the report said. And then the NDP took that, which is a vision of what could be in 20 years, and said the Conservatives are going to cut 4.3 billion. They know exactly what they're doing. You don't do that much digging into the reports and to the platform positions the Conservatives are putting out on healthcare. Find that little statistic and genuinely conclude that what they were proposing was cutting spending. That's obviously not true. What's another one? That they are going to I think they said they were going to cancel building new schools. No, that's obviously stupid. Also, the NDP has crashed the school system. They got rid of letter grades in schools. That's insane. You're not going to have scoring. We're just going to have subjective scoring. This is the BC NDP's ideology on full display in the schools. Just get rid of marks because it makes kids feel bad if they don't do as well. Well, maybe the kid's going to feel much worse when he can't get a job because he was never actually accurately scored in school so that his parents and the teachers could help him improve. I know that they're still technically tracking kids' progress, but without having that actual objective marker, you will have standards slipping. SOGI 1, 2, 3, that's another thing in schools where we now, through anti-bullying tools in the classroom, are able to slip in gender theory. Oh, a kid got made fun of. Someone made a trans joke or whatever. Oh, now we get to pull out the SOGI 1, 2, 3 portfolio and open it up to gender theory, and we get to now teach gender theory. I talked to a teacher who's actually a little bit more on the liberal side, and she specifically said, this is not actually how proper anti-bullying type programming should be done in schools. It's not about sitting kids down and lecturing them about why you should respect this kid because of his religion or whatever else. You don't need, if someone gets, and I've even talked to people, they said, oh yeah, I used to get made fun of in the early 2000s when they were going to school because I was Sikh or whatever. All those people who made fun of me are my friend. And no teacher ever sat them down and said, now you're going to learn about the Sikh religion, because that's not how kids work. It's absolutely destroying childhood to not have kids have to learn lessons on their own rather than having some random 30-something, 20-something sociology major come in and tell kids how they're wrong and how they should think. It's ridiculous. The province is in a debt crisis. They just had a $9 billion deficit this last year. I think we're at $9 billion in debt or whatever. And the BC NDP released their platform showing, oh, the deficit's going to go down. When have they ever showed fiscal restraint? Oh, on this piece of paper that says that we will have fiscal restraint in 10 years? They're not. They're just saying enough to get through this election. It's like Bonnie Henry. She hasn't been fired yet. At the same time, they're trying to go after a BC Conservative candidate because 2 years ago, he posted something concerned about people who might have vaccine injuries. And they've been dragging that guy, Chris Sankey, through the mud ever since they brought that up in the election, dragged them during the debates and whatnot, effectively mocking much of the Indigenous community who is rightfully concerned about whenever the government mandates stuff on them because of their history with the Canadian government and the BC government. And then, even though they're mocking him for that, even though David Eby still employs Bonnie Henry as the chief medical officer of BC, it's this lady who thinks that we should potentially think about selling government meth, crack, and all these other things, safe supply drugs, in pharmacies. She still has a job, but she's a doctor. Cool, whatever. I don't know what crackerjack box she got that flipping medical degree from, but it must have looked really good, really convincing when she put in her resume. Oh my goodness. But yeah, the entire thing has just been Conservatives bad. The entire election has just been Conservatives bad. And I will lose a little bit of respect for BC voters if it turns out they're like, well, everyone's worse off. Crime's rampant. The school system's falling apart. Healthcare system's falling apart. But, a BC Conservative candidate once said something 10 years ago. I can't help you with that. Anyways, I'm still pretty confident that we're going to win. The last projections I saw, and maybe I'll just bring them up on screen for the benefit of everyone here. It's just the BC election dashboard. It's super tight. Basically, I think that these numbers are just being shown by Main Street because they don't know. Because this is the most I don't know what the outcome's going to be type projection you could possibly come up with. BC NDP 46, BC Conservatives 45, Greens 2, which would effectively almost be like a tie race, considering that the NDP and Greens would only have a coalition majority by a single seat because they'd have to pick a speaker. So I think this is a pure dead heat, and it depends on who actually shows up to the polls. I'll even go down here and show you that, like, when they project that it's this close and that the BC Conservatives are down a few seats, there's tons of seats that they have shown leaning towards the NDP here. So their system's always a little bit clunky for zooming. But there are tons of seats around here that they have leaning NDP that I've toured them, I've door knocked in them. I really don't see a lot of these seats going NDP based on my experience door knocking in the ridings, even in the really heavy BC NDP communities where the poll, like the local poll district, was like 75%, 70% NDP in the 2020 race. They're like 50-50 this election, and I think the Conservatives are going to show up. Change voters in general are far more likely to show up. And now we have this giant rainstorm. I think, again, they call it an atmospheric river or lake or whatever, that's putting like hundreds. I think in one area, someone texted me this morning, in one area of BC, there was 200 millimeters of rain that landed in 2 hours. That's absolutely wild. And so what we end up, I think what we'll see is I think we'll actually have the people who really want change showing up, and a lot of the NDP who are really just anti-conservative voters deciding that maybe they'll just chill at home, watch Netflix, pet their cat, all that stuff. Hopefully that happens. There's still a good chance the BC NDP could win. I would say that this race has come down to a 60-40 between the Conservatives and the NDP. So again, if you live in BC and you haven't voted yet, I don't know how you made this far in the video without going out and voting, but if you haven't voted yet, go and vote, get your neighbors to vote, get your kids to vote. If you don't live in BC, go through your Facebook timeline, find your friends that you know who lived in BC, and make sure that they voted for the BC Conservatives. Because, you know, it could be the difference between the province absolutely falling into a black hole or actually having prosperity once again. BC has no excuse for being as kind of poorly managed as it is. It has probably better natural resources anywhere in Canada, except for my home province of Alberta. And it should be one of the nicest places to stay, especially with Washington State and Oregon over the border who have similar problems. If BC just stopped having woke, hyper-progressive governance, it could start having the population of those states come up to Canada because there's way more prosperity, way more opportunities to exploit. Anyways, okay, that's it for me today, guys. This has been a wild ride. I'll probably be coming back to Alberta in 3 or 4 days from now. I'll be on the nicer, better set. I will get a haircut because this is getting a bit wild. At some point, I had this like weird George Washington thing going where like my hair was kind of like coming up there and then it was like poking out on the sides or whatever. And I was just a set of wooden teeth away from apparently helping liberate a country from the British. So that will be great. If you want to support the show, you can always donate to my Give, Send, Go legal fund in the description of this video below, as well as pinned at the top of the comments. I'm $33,000 deep in fighting back against a Chinese billionaire developer suing myself, the National Telegraph, for defamation, even though in the almost 3-year-long case, he still hasn't even filed evidence. His evidence in order that he filed after we harassed him, and a judge even rewarded me $1,800 because he kept being late on filing these things. He filed his LinkedIn profile, his company website, his original libel notice, and our article as his evidence. You'll notice that none of that as actual evidence. It's basically just saying, I didn't like that you said this. I gave you a notice saying I didn't like that you said this. And here's a LinkedIn profile and a website saying I'm a great guy. That's literally it. I think I filed like 16, 22 pieces of evidence. It was pretty substantial because we were correct. And actually, the report that we put out back when TNT, the National Telegraph, was purely a written publication, we had a guest writer mention him in an article about who O'Toole was taking money from. And when we mentioned him, We just linked to a Globe and Mail investigation about him that was like 2,000 words long that was written a year and a half ago by Robert Fife and Stephen Chase, two very good investigative journalists, as well as a Chinese diaspora political expert. And he never sued them, but he sued me because he thought me, as a 22-year-old at the time, was just going to cut and run and give him a fake apology so he can pretend he's big and intimidating. At least that's my opinion and my read on the case. Regardless, so if you want to donate anything to that, really helps me out, cuts down on the legal costs I have, and lets me reinvest in the show here. But I'll see you guys next time, probably releasing another video later in the day. Go and vote if you live in BC. It doesn't matter what riding. It's not like, oh, well, they're going to win this riding anyways. You literally don't know, because I don't know what ridings are in play and not in play at this point. Have a good one.